Solving multi-step equations really isn't that different from the 1 and 2-step equations that we've already done. It just may require a little bit more simplifying to start out with. So there's 4 basic steps that we can kind of start with whenever we're trying to solve these multi-step equations. First, you want to eliminate any parentheses by distributing. You want to make sure you distribute because you may have to combine some like terms after you do so. So step 2 is of course combine any like terms, so that way you're seeing the equation in its simplest form. And then from there, it really just becomes either a 1 or 2-step equation. So if it's a 2-step, the first thing you want to do, just like we've been doing, is isolate the term with the variable. And again, this is usually going to be addition or subtraction. And then from there, we can finally just solve for the variable using either multiplication or division. So these first 2 examples are really just refreshing you on 2-step equations. So for example 1, we have the height in inches of a plant after t days is 1/2 t plus 6. After how many days is a plant 21 inches tall? So they're giving you the final height, so essentially you're just taking the expression that they pretty much already gave you and setting it equal to that 21 inches. From here we can see we don't have anything to simplify, we don't have any distribution, so we can just start with our solving process. So since 1/2 t is our term with the variable, we're going to subtract 6 from both sides first, which leaves us with 1/2 t equals 15. And then to get rid of the 1/2, remember fractions work a little different than most whole numbers where we can get rid of them by multiplying by its reciprocal. That way we don't have to worry about the whole dividing aspect. So multiply both sides by really 2/1, so we end up with t equals 15 times 2, which of course is 30. Go ahead and try the next one on your own. I'm going to start showing my work, but I'm not really going to talk too much through it. And don't let the decimal throw you off. Just remember to move it over once you have to divide by that 1.5. Okay, so as you can see, we got x equals 6 years. So it's pretty much the same steps as the first one. Subtract and then divide, and we get our final answer. Okay, on this next example, it's exactly what we did at the end of 3.5. Before we can get started, you can see that there's a negative 2m and a 4m that is definitely calling for attention to be put together first. So we add the negative 2m and the 4m, end up with just 2m plus 5 equals negative 3. And now it's just a standard 2-step equation. So first I'm going to draw in my balance line and then subtract 5 from both sides. And I get that 2m equals a negative 8. Remember, the negative 3 minus 5, I'm still going in that negative direction. So 2m equals negative 8, divided by 2 on both sides, and m equals negative 4. So far, it really hasn't been anything new. We're just bringing together all of the skills that we've been doing so far in Chapter 3. Go ahead and try these next 2 examples on your own. Again, my work will be up here, but I'm not going to really be talking too much through it because all we're doing is finding those like terms, putting them together, and then solving for a variable from there. Okay, so up until this point, we haven't really done anything too new. If you look at example 3, we are going to use the distributive property before we end up solving for our x. So part A, we have 2 times 1 minus 5x plus 4 equals that negative 8. So before we do anything, we want to make sure that we do take care of this 2 times the 1 minus 5x. So remember, we have to do the multiplication in 2 parts, so we're going to take the 2 times 1, which is going to give us 2, and then 2 times the negative 5x, because it's minus 5x, is going to be minus 10x, and then everything else is just going to kind of come rewritten. Okay, from here now, if we think back to what we just did in example 2, I see that I have a 2 and then I have plus 4, so I want to make sure I take care of those like terms first. So I have 6 minus 10x equals negative 8, and now I'm back to the two-step equation. If you're going to write the equation like I did here, when you go to balance, just be very careful. Remember, this 6 right here is a positive 6, so to get rid of it, I do have to subtract 6, but then I am still left with this negative 10x here, so make sure the negative gets brought down as well. Ooh, change color. So now I have negative 10x equals a negative 14, and then divide both sides by that negative 10. Okay, since it cannot be a whole number, I can just simplify it as an improper fraction, so I can leave it as negative divided by negative is going to leave me with a positive 7 over 5. Remember, any equivalence to 7 over 5 works as well, so if you wanted to change it to 1 2/5, or if you wanted to change it to 1.4, that works too. Okay, so now if we look at part B, again, we have this distribution that has to happen first here with the negative 4 times 3g minus 1. So when I go through, again, watching your negatives, we end up with negative 12g, and negative 4 times negative 5 is going to be plus 20, and then we're left over with the plus 10g equals 19. Okay, looking for those like terms, I see I have negative 12g, and then I have a 10g over here, so I'm left with negative 2g plus 20 is equal to 19, and then I can throw in my balance line and start solving. So get rid of that 20, so subtract 20 from both sides, left with negative 2g equals negative 1, 19 minus 20. And then finally finish solving for g by dividing by that negative 2. So g is equal to a positive 1/2, and you could also put 0.5 if you really wanted to. Okay, so for both of these problems, don't be worried if you get a fraction as an answer. Remember, fractions are numbers too, so that is okay. The whole thing is that you're following your steps and you're making sure that you're following through with your signs, whether it should become a positive, negative, whatever ends up happening. Okay, so go ahead and try these next two. Again, I'll be working through it. So just make sure you're, again, watching your negatives and finishing up with that variable. Okay, so these two ended up not being too bad. The thing you got to make sure when you're distributing is that you're really conscious of the negatives and that you get all your like terms together before you start balancing your equation. Okay, so this next real life application is actually really cool because it's probably something you could actually use to figure out a score for yourself. So it says you've scored 7, 10, 8, and 9 on 4 quizzes. Write and solve an equation to find the score you need on the 5th quiz so that your mean score is 8. Now remember, when we find mean, you're really just finding the average. So since we're trying to find the average on 5 quiz scores, we're going to take those 5 scores, add them up, and then divide by 5. However, you only have the first 4 scores. So for the 5th one, that's where the variable comes in. So for the equation, it's going to be 7 plus 10 plus 8 plus 9. I'm just going to use plus x, and then I divide it by that 5 and set it equal to that mean score of 8. Okay, from here I can see in the numerator I have some simplifying I can do. I can add up those first 4 quiz scores. So when I add up the 7, 10, 8, and 9, I end up with 34 plus x over 5 equals 8. Now remember that the numerator of fraction is really like a special case of parentheses. So in order to be able to kind of break into my variable, I need to undo the negative 5 or the 5 first. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 5 to get 34 plus x equals 40, and then I can finish solving for x by subtracting the 34. So the last quiz score we need is 6. So with this one, you really have to be careful because it's kind of breaking the order that we've been doing this whole time, but it's only because we have the variable kind of in the numerator of the fraction. Okay, so go ahead and see if you can figure out the last one. So you have the 3 given test scores. You're trying to find the score, on the 4th test so that your mean score is 90. Once you complete and check this one, then you'll be all good to go for 3.6.